making those front pages, and starting with the Telegraph, a Commons committee has blocked the use of £130,000 in donations from Brexit supporters to make Big Ben chime on the 31st of January. The father of a teenage girl who took her own life after viewing self-harm content on Instagram says social media companies should pay more tax to fund mental health treatment. That's on the front of the Metro. In the Express, the mother of a boy with cystic fibrosis is pleading for access to a life-saving drug. The main story for The Guardian, the owners of a gambling firm, Betfred, also owns a company which helps with gambling addiction. The Mirror suggests it could take 6 months for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to transition to their new life. The royal couple have let staff at Frogmore Cottage go as they prepare to spend more time in Canada, according to the Daily Mail. The Eye focuses on the popularity of vegan diets. The Sun goes with the departure of the presenter Sandy Toksvig from the Great British Bake Off. City regulators have warned banks they need to stop using the interbank lending system LIBOR. That's according to the Financial Times. And the Star reports on problems at the lingerie firm owned by Dragon's Den judge Theo Paphitis. So Joyce Macmillan and Asa Bennett here with me tonight, and pretty much a different story on every newspaper tomorrow morning, an awful lot around to discuss. You picked out the Daily Mirror, first of all, which has a picture of Prince Harry on its front page. The last official engagement, or certainly the first time we've seen him at an official engagement since he made that shock statement about he and his wife wanting to step back from being senior royals, and possibly the last time we'll see him on official royal duties in future.
Well, indeed, we saw him for the Rugby World Cup draws, and he seemed like he's trying to get on with business. And yet, at the same time, what the Mirror digs into on the front page is the talks behind the scenes about what you might call Megxit, of them, going to Canada, breaking away from their time in Britain, in effect trying to have the perks of being royals without the obligations of being royals, the half-in, half-out system. And then they say, actually, these talks might drag on so long, it may take this so-called transition period up to 6 months to really hammer out. The reason why is because the Queen is basically worried that they're going to be too trashy in trying to exploit and commercialise the name Sussex Royal, which, may then seem very august, although to me sounds like a brand of potato, but, nonetheless, it does seem, who knows what they might do. We've seen the footage a few days ago of Prince Harry collaring at a premiere, I think, of the film Lion King, the CEO of Disney, to point at Meghan and say, she does voiceovers, as if to try and drum up business with Disney. So that may be a prospect. At the same time, we know that Harry is working with Oprah Winfrey on a sort of TV series, a media sort of outlet examining mental health. So at this point, I think it's just going to be very sensitive, because clearly if he still wants to carry the name, he's going to have to make sure to, toe the line somewhat to stay part of the royal household.
Well, that's right. It clearly is a delicate balance, isn't it? And the negotiations or the discussions within the family and with all those civil servants who are charged with trying to thrash out some kind of arrangement, it is a very delicate process. And do you think that this issue of to what extent royals or former royals can get engaged with commercial businesses is a sensitive one?
It is sensitive, and of course there's so many sort of levels of royals. There are people like Prince Andrew's daughters who have jobs, but still retain their royal titles. There are people who take money from the civil list, but not as much as if they were doing more engagements. It's the core group of the royal family that take on the bulk of the engagements, and it is extremely complicated. And it's also a measure, if you like, of just how difficult Harry's situation is and how many dimensions it has, in that he clearly has this real emotional need to kind of put some distance between himself and the firm, at least for a while. I get the sense that nobody in this situation, except possibly Meghan, wants to burn bridges completely, because, Harry has been raised to be a royal. And we
don't know if Meghan does either. We don't know
what any of them really think about it. but at the same time, they seem to have this very urgent need to get away for now. So I think probably, the sort of palace civil servants will be trying to thrash out some way that they can do that and achieve some of their aim of financial independence, which is quite a laudable aim, if they don't want to be taking public money when they're not doing so many royal duties. But the fact is, how, using your celebrity, do you make the kind of money that they will need to support anything like the lifestyle that they're used to without doing things that may sometimes get a bit tacky?
Well, that's right.
Sort of selling yourself on the freelance market.
I guess we don't know what kind of lifestyle they want. They may want a very simple lifestyle. And you talked about them wanting to get away from the firm, which is the expression given to the royal family, isn't it? But let's take a look inside The Sun. There's a double-page spread here. To some extent, you could say, and again, we don't know what's behind we don't know their feelings behind all of this, that they were trying to get away from the media. And there's, again, more coverage. It's been weeks of it in the papers once again. I'm out of air, they say, a strong hint that today's appearance was his last royal job. Do you think that's more to do with it? They're trying to get away from the media and the prying eyes of being out in public?
Clearly, Harry seems to almost keep accidentally or maybe deliberately trying to encourage this idea that he is off, he is on his way out, because the Harryologists, the specialist fans that he has for the Sussex Royal Instagram, have noted that the recent video he's put out has the Stone Roses hit with the very, very relevant lyrics, I'd like to leave the country for a month of Sundays. And you're thinking, almost keep accidentally or maybe
from the media. And there's, again, more coverage. It's been weeks of it in the papers once again. I'm out of air, they say, a strong hint that today's appearance was his last royal job. Do you think that's more to do with it? They're trying to get away from the media and the prying eyes of being out in public?
Clearly, Harry seems to almost keep accidentally or maybe deliberately trying to encourage this idea that he is off, he is on his way out, because the Harryologists, the specialist fans that he has for the Sussex Royal Instagram, have noted that the recent video he's put out has the Stone Roses hit with the very, very relevant lyrics, I'd like to leave the country for a month of Sundays. And you're thinking, he clearly wants to leave the country for a lot more than just Sundays at this rate, given that Meghan's still in Vancouver, popping up, as there are photos also on these pages, at all sorts of places now. But at the same time, where does this really end? Because obviously, you can then sort of have this sort of half-in, half-out relationship. And yes, you do have some royals then who do, commercial ventures and that go quite well. We note that Prince Charles, for example, the Duchy of Cornwall, you can go to Waitrose now and get Duchy's Originals, all sorts of produce in a sense, like butter and margarine, you name it, it has it, after he sold that off. At the same time, I think the central reason, incidentally, why there's this sort of charges of hypocrisy and all this vitriol thrown at Harry for the way he's handled this is because there's a really curious thing. When they keep saying, okay, they want to be independent, working royals, as Joyce says, a laudable aim. The trouble is, the way they define a working royal is that they basically give up 5% of their income, which is the sort of sovereign grant. And they still would have Prince Charles's money from the Duchy of Cornwall, which for some weird royal accountancy terminology is still classed as private income, although some viewers may well disagree in that sense. So they still would only be getting about 95% of the same income. So this is why people would think they're trying to have their cake and eat it.
Well, and who knows how that will turn out in the end once the final details talks are indeed ongoing, and I'm sure as soon as there are any details, it'll be widely discussed. But let's move on to other issues now. Inside The Times, you've picked up an article about President Trump. Impeachment proceedings formally beginning today with various swearings-in going on in Washington today. And this is Trump broke law by freezing Ukraine aid. And this is one of the issues that's being discussed, isn't it, during this impeachment trial? So who is it that's saying that today?
It's the Government Accountability Office of the United States. So it's a fairly, it's a fairly serious matter. And as one news story that I was reading today puts it, there is this increasingly fairly overwhelming raft of evidence that Donald Trump did very likely do some of the things of which he's accused in his impeachment articles. And the question faced by the Senate then is not so much did he do it, as do they care? Do they care that he did it? Do they think that it's as serious a breach of his constitutional obligations and of the Constitution itself as the House Democrats think that it is? And this is another kind of piece of evidence towards that an impartial government watchdog has concluded that he did indeed seek to withhold aid from Ukraine in return for essentially a political favour to help him with this year's presidential election.
And perhaps, predictably, his response has been the case against me is a hoax. He's calling it a witch hunt once again.
Con job from the Democrats.
That's right, and that's what it will come down to, essentially, is that kind of political line, won't it? Because 2/3 of senators have to vote to impeach him, and there are more Republicans than Democrats in that House, and so he's very unlikely to be found guilty in this trial.
But completely, and obviously the Trump base are not going to change their minds, because they still go to the rallies, they're packed out, they cheer their man, and as he rails against the system, the establishment, I'm still fighting for you. The politics, then, this is really, as Joyce is saying, what will help swing it, because as we know, the House of Representatives is Democratic dominated. All of Trump's enemies really throwing their lot in, trying to get this man out, and they have to go in all in. By contrast, the Senate is Republican dominated. And so, as you're saying, they need a 2/3 majority to really, have this trial successfully get rid of him. But then you are requiring so many Republican senators then to then have crises of conscience that they would then, break the party whip and go for it. And yet, when we've seen recent history of President Trump, they don't do that. They toe the line. They want their man in. They're willing to swallow quite a lot to keep that going.
Well, yes, it's going to be absolutely fascinating anyway to see this play out, but also to see what effect it could have on any future election, on the future election, and whether or not it affects his base, if you like, whether it hardens them in favour of him, or whether some might hear evidence and not like what they hear.
Yes, well, I think the crucial group, obviously, are the softer kind of elements of the people who voted for him last time. His very strong base will stick with him, as Aziz has just been saying, but there's a group somewhere there in the middle who may be beginning to have doubts with him. Will this harden their support for him because they think he's being got at, or will they look at the evidence and think, he really was kind of besmirching the office of president here?
The thing is, what's the alternative they have? The Democrats are fighting like rats in a sack.
Yes.
So, they got to stick with their man. That's clearly what they're thinking.
But I guess fighting like rats in a sack is the process of sorting out who the candidate is, and maybe when they found one, things might be different. Who knows? Anyway, plenty to watch over in America. And actually, a story next that brings in President Trump, because it's inside the Daily Mail, and this is about Huawei and what role it might be given in 5G in this country. President Trump has urged Britain not to have any dealings with Huawei, but it looks like they may get a non-core contract. Is that right?
Yeah, this is quite an interesting question, because there's been quite a lot of pressure on the British government not to allow Huawei any role in rolling out 5G in Britain because of the alleged security risks with Huawei, which is a Chinese-based company, and therefore, however good the company's own intentions, may at some stage receive an order from the Chinese government to give up huge amounts of data that it might have acquired through 5G technology, which I don't claim to understand, but I understand that it involves gathering huge amounts of data, or being in charge of huge amounts of data. Now, the Australian government have decided on security grounds, quite a right-wing government in Australia, to go along with the United States government and say that they won't allow Huawei this kind of role. Pressure on Boris Johnson to line up with that group of leaders, but he doesn't seem to be about to do that. Certainly the Mail believes that he's poised, as they put it, to allow the Chinese firm Huawei a limited role in Britain's 5G network, presumably with some safeguards on the security front.
And very briefly, because we should go to a break, but it's interesting, isn't it, given that this relationship with the US is crucial if a trade deal is to be struck.
Well, he's doing sort of, trying to straddle both lines, isn't he? And also, crucially for Huawei, then he'd say he does cheap services. Because if you don't allow them, then the bills would have to go up for consumers.
Okay, another interesting one. Okay, we're going to take a break. Plenty more to talk about after the break, including a bake-off tragedy as the Rolling Scones, I think I have to say it.
Oh, yes.
Scones doesn't work. The Rolling Scones split up. That's coming up in a moment.